Hey YouTube, it's Alex here, back with the live sessions. So this video is the very first of what is going to be our primary format, which is an interview style video that we're going to be doing. And today we're talking about what we're referring to as the bug in the system, which is essentially the imperfect components that dictate how society works. So we're going to be talking about that through the video today, and with me is Ryan, who is an IT professional and also a blogger, and I think he does gaming streaming as well in his own right. Ryan. Okay, hi Ryan. How you doing?
Yeah, I'm good.
Good, mate. So tell me, in an IT system or a computer system, what effect does a bug have?
Really, you've got to see and think of a bug, not a real bug, not a little ladybird, but a bug as really as a hurdle.
Okay.
So when a problem occurs or a system error occurs or a system bug occurs, it's almost a very high hurdle that the system then cannot process or get past that point.
Right. Okay. So in effect, it stops the system from working.
It stops the system in its tracks because the system is expecting a response, and it's expecting a response that is pre-programmed. So it knows if I send this, I expect this.
Yeah.
And if it gets anything else,
it hasn't got the protocols built in to allow it to actually do anything else with that information.
Right. And it can't then turn itself around and go, okay, well, I didn't get the answer I wanted. Let's go somewhere else. It stops at that point and says, whoa, no, I can't do that anymore.
But as I understand, some systems can function with bugs in them. They just don't function fully. Is that correct?
Yeah. So you're going to get you're going to get an answer that isn't specifically the answer that you expected or you wanted.
Okay.
So, for instance, if you running in, I don't know, a word processor. We know there's many word processors out there.
Even though everyone only uses Microsoft Word, really.
Yeah, if you want to use the right one, use Word. If you want to save a file, for example, and you want to save it as a PDF, you save it as a PDF, and you may then get half the page printed and then a white sheet after that. Why? Well, you've asked for that full sheet. There's a bug, and the printer or the virtual printer has gone, don't know what the rest of that page is.
Don't know what the rest of that is.
So
can't read the rest of that, and so therefore you get a blank. Right.
So it's responded to you to a point. It's then got to that hurdle and gone, no idea. I can't find the rest, or I don't know what to do with the rest of that paragraph, so I'll just give you a blank piece of paper for the rest of the remaining sheet of paper.
So in effect, a bug is something that stops the system from operating perfectly.
Yeah. I feel, as a personal, from a personal side, that there is no perfect piece of software, and there never will be. There's always room for improvement, but there is never. We as people and computers as computers are never going to be perfect.
Yeah.
And
I think that's kind of the point that we're sort of discussing today, is obviously the fact that one of the biggest problems I see in the world at the moment is that there seems to be this very sort of strong push within certain circles that are trying to create a world that is, in effect, perfect, in as much as you create equality for everybody gets the same thing, everybody's happy, and so on. But in order to create a perfect system, a perfect world for everything to exist in, then every component of that system has to be perfect.
100%.
I think every single person who's got any sort of sense of self-awareness will be able to admit that they're not perfect, which means that with with a system full of imperfect components, it's essentially impossible to create perfection. It's essentially
Yeah,
impossible to
100%.
actually get to perfection at all. And I suppose that the way I see this is that it's almost like there's a sort of a lack of acceptance amongst people that that with people being accepted as imperfect, which is part of this the sort of the paradoxical element of this. It's almost this whole sort of push of like, oh, accept yourself as who you are and be whoever you are, and you're not perfect. You're not a perfect person. You can make mistakes. You can do things wrong and so on. But yet those people can create a perfect world. It makes absolutely no sense.
There is no way where in life, and especially in the technology sector as a whole, technology is now part of everybody's life, whether that is driving to the shops or going to the hospital, doctors. There is always going to be some form of technology in life nowadays, and with technology, there's bugs, and you're never, like I say, never going to create a perfect system, and that is, like you say, the same as in the real world. It's impossible.
Yes, well, I mean, I think it almost kind of links up quite nicely, because essentially what we're saying is that it's impossible for imperfect people to create a perfect world. So therefore, it's going to be also impossible for imperfect people to create a perfect piece of technology.
Yep.
Because that technology is always going to be subject to some sort of human error. It is always going to have different people interact with it in different ways, which I think is again the problem when you try to create systems and so on within society that's designed to create this wonderful utopian world. That every single individual person is going to interact with it in a different way, and as a result, you're always going to get complete anomalies that the system can't deal with.
100%. Yeah.
Which I think happens in pretty much every single system that there is. That you've got to create something that works for the aggregate rather than something that works for the minority. But I think a big part of the problem in the modern age is that there's a lot of things that are being adjusted to fit the minority, and therefore not actually serving the majority particularly well.
I agree. Yeah,
and I think that if we relate that back to computers and computer systems, that's a little bit like you getting the new iPhone and discover that it's mostly set up for someone who's deaf when you're not. And and although you can kind of deal with it, it's actually not that useful for you. And for most people who aren't deaf, it's not particularly useful for them. It's there's no point catering for the main process of something to be focused on a minority of cases.
I think that's one of the main things, that because everybody isn't the same. We know that. If everybody was the same, the world would be extremely boring. It would be. So I think part of the issue with the world being an imperfect place, because it is, especially at the moment, we know that, far from, is you're never going to be able to cater for everybody, because there is so much difference between even me and yourself, so much difference.
And we agree on most things, but yet there's still so many differences between you and I when it comes to all sorts of things. So it's even when it comes down to things like our general ability to particular things. There'll be things that you're good at that I'm not good at, and things that vice versa, that I'm good at and you're not, and so on. So
100%.
People are anything but equal. And I think that's one of the problems with the whole idea that you can create an equal society with unequal people. It's a complete impossible, imbalanceable equation. But there seems to be this fairly mindless kind of head down drive towards trying to do that. Mostly, I would say, among people who believe themselves to be our moral and intellectual superiors, but who are actually in reality neither.
I think with that as well, people in that category, shall we say, yes, they may think and may be very, very sort of superior, as in with their intellect and overall knowledge, but they still are not perfect.
Exactly.
There is still huge issues with, certain people that you don't see day to day. You may look at them and think, yeah, they're very, very clever, but there's always going to be something wrong.
Well, I mean, I think what it comes down to, and it's something that I find very interesting. I watch a lot of videos featuring Thomas Sowell, who's incredibly wise guy, and I like listening to a lot of the stuff that he talks about. And he talks about this particular thing, that you can be extremely clever and you can be extremely well educated and extremely good in your particular field.
Yeah.
But when you try to step out of that field, you are in essence an amateur. So for example, I would rate myself as kind of an expert when it comes to what I do as my general business, but I wouldn't be able to then apply that same expertise and go and train horses.
Yeah, 100%.
Because it's completely outside of my area of expertise. So by the same measure, it would be foolish of me to ever try to tell someone who trains horses how to do it.
Yeah.
But unfortunately, we seem to be getting a lot of this in the world these days. That we're getting people who don't have any inclination of the lives of the people that they're telling how to live their lives.
Yeah.
And
a lot of that at the moment.
People who have never lived that sort of experience. It's always been the thing to me that I've always felt that the career politician is one of the worst things for democracy, because they're generally people who have been very highly educated. They're generally people who have gone to Eton or Harrow or one of those, and then gone on to Oxford or Cambridge, and then gone straight on into political life, having never actually lived really in the real world in any semblance of what 99.9% of people experience as the real world.
I mean, I see, especially touching on the politics and the politician sort of scale, is that if you watch on a Wednesday 12 o'clock, I don't know if you do personally watch the Prime Minister's questions. I've stopped watching it. No, I've stopped watching it because it really is a full circle with this exact subject, that on one side you have, we've done this, we've done this, we've done this. And on the other side, they're arguing to say, well, actually, we would have done this. So you'd expect the middle ground to be perfect, when in essence, neither are right.
No,
we
exactly,
know that.
Yeah. Well, it's like the hypothetical questions, isn't it? It's like, well, it's that's why I think Johnson was quite right in calling Starmer Captain Hindsight, because really that's exactly what is going on with a lot of these things. Is like, well, we would have done it differently because now we know what the outcome was.
Yep, 100%.
Nobody going in knows what the outcome's going to be.
No.
And actually, it's often the case that outcomes tend to be worse than what you think. It's a very common occurrence that going in with the best intentions, something has started with the best of intentions, ends up being terrible. Perfect example is obviously the first time that there was an attempt to create a sort of a sort of a perfect world, and communism. The whole idea and the whole intention behind that is that you liberated people from wealth inequality.
Yeah.
But in essence, all you did was liberate anybody with over a certain amount of wealth from any of their wealth, and forced everybody down to the same level of poverty. And in Russia alone, there was at least 100 million people killed in the last century just due to that, and that's I think one of the big problems with the idea of going in with good intentions. It's not the intentions of the thing that actually matter. What actually matters is the outcomes that they achieved. You can approach something and say, we really want this to work, but that doesn't mean that just because it comes from a good place, if it's not working, don't keep doing it. It's there's many examples where a government continues to push on something, continues to try to do something, all due to the fact that they've simply gone ahead and committed to it, and it's a nice idea, but in reality it's not working. But because it's a nice idea, it'll be unpopular for them to stop it.
Yes,
So
they're past the point of
so
failure.
therefore, yeah, they just keep plowing money into it, keep wasting effort and resources on it forever. But I think people do that in their own lives as well. There's a phenomenon which I forget the name of. It's something like effort bias or something like that, I think it's called. But basically, it talks about how if you have spent a long time doing something, you naturally want to keep doing it until you make it successful, despite any evidence to the contrary that it's just not going to be.
Yeah,
because
100%. Yeah,
it's kind of like the thing about, like, because you spend a long time making the mistake, you feel like it's like you should spend time to rectify it. Whereas actually sometimes it's that can sort of drag you down a pathway that doesn't take you anywhere good. And you were mentioning something similar to of this kind of thing to me earlier about obviously things with work and so on. That those are easy traps to fall into, and people do it all the time.
Very, very. I mean, I was. I don't know if you've seen or watched anything with Elon Musk.
I've
we
watched
all
a
know.
few of his,
We all know he's a different guy in many ways. Very, very knowledgeable guy, but again, he has his faults. But he fell in that very trap where he started Tesla as a brand and set out to fix the world with electric vehicles, which I am a very firm believer. If I could afford one, I'd have one, because I think that is the way that ultimately the world needs to go. It doesn't have to go that way, but I believe it needs to get there very, very quickly, in some way or another. And he said on a podcast I watched not long ago that you never, even with cars, rockets to go to Mars, you're never going to make something perfect, and you can never 100% rely on anything because it isn't perfect, and that is very true with IT. We have servers out at customer sites. We have websites running on servers, and I can't walk away at the end of a day and go, yeah, that's all fine. Because
there's a guarantee that'll all be still working in the morning.
Yeah, there's no way. I've said to you many a time, we can have the best system in the world, but it only takes a few things to happen. One bug, and that bug could be a person, because it can be. People think that a bug in a system is a bit of code or an electrical conductor on a board. No, it can be a person. It could be
a person who's interacting with the system in the wrong way, essentially,
and they're a bug. Because they've given that computer or that server the wrong piece or the wrong input, and the server's like, no, I don't want that. I wasn't expecting that. So, again, you strive for perfect, but you can never get to perfect.
Yes, I think that's a part. In my estimation, I think that's a it's sort of intrinsic to the human condition, isn't it? That essentially what's brought us to where we are from where we began, and although we don't absolutely know where we began, we know that for a long time we were essentially sort of nomadic kind of upright ape people, and we've moved from there to where we are now, where we've got this technology where you and I can sit in houses 20 miles apart and have a live conversation, stream it, record it, and put it up onto a platform where the whole world can go and watch it. That in of itself is an innovation that wouldn't have even been conceivable 40 years ago.
No.
Let alone 40,000 years ago. It's beyond any kind of precedent that's actually got us here. But everything that brings us forward is the human condition to strive to make things better. And so I think that although we're talking about the fact that the bug in the system means we as imperfect people will never be able to create perfection, I think that shouldn't tell anybody to stop trying. Because the whole point of of humanity, and the whole thing that makes us what we are, and has helped us achieve what we are, is the fact that we are always doing that. We are always trying to make things better. We are always trying to get further with things.
Yeah,
And
I agree.
And I think that to try to take that away from people would be wrong anyway. But I think that the problem is that there's that almost kind of that juxtaposition of, I want to strive for perfection even though it's unattainable, essentially.
Yeah.
Which is why,
I mean,
people who are perfectionists, I think, suffer from quite, they tend to be quite depressive sort of people. They tend to feel quite down and quite sad a lot of the time, because they're perfectionists, because they want everything to be perfect, and nothing ever is. Yeah.
I think that technology is, compares to 40 years ago, 50 years ago. I know we had the war. What was that? 60, maybe? Well, no. What year was it? 46, 47. World War Two.
World War Two was 1936 to 1945. So that is now over 80 years ago. Yeah.
80 years. Yeah. I should know that. My granddad was born in World War Two, so I should know that. Anyway, I think that technology now, compares to the wartime, is more so now to blame for the imperfect world, because a mistake made in World War Two, yes, it was a mistake. We did make some huge mistakes in World War Two that really put us on a pivot of win or loss, and that's one of my real areas of I love the World War Two and anything about it, and how it all went on, and blah blah blah. But if you take the World War Two situation and put that into the world now in 2021, I think that the imperfections of how it was dealt with would be magnified to a point where it would be 10 times worse. Because,
well, I mean, obviously, any world war that starts these days, especially between any superpowers, is going to end up being a nuclear one, unfortunately. And I think that's.
I'm on the fence, because technology is everyone's lives. I do think that the next, God forbid if there is one, but the next world war, or the next war, will be cyber. I do think that, yes, I think nuclear will be part of it, but I do think that because a system can be taken down very, very easily, I do think the next war will be cyber based, where they say if you can blind a country for an hour, it would cause huge death.
I mean, by that measure, you could almost make an argument that it's already started, because they've already caught the Chinese government out a number of times, especially for cyber attacks in numerous countries. So you could argue that if there is ever going to be a world war that's a cyber war, it's already started. It's already happening.
I think so. I think there's a lot going on diplomatically that we don't know about, and I think we are bearing the brunt of the attacks.
Well, I wouldn't
even
say that
now,
we're necessarily bearing the brunt of it. I think it's more that what we're feeling is the ripple effects of it. I would say is most likely what it is, because obviously for most people, for the most part, they're not really affected or touched by it. It's more that obviously that has knock-on effects into everything else, doesn't it? And I think that's where the issue comes. But
I mean, I run back to a customer. I won't go into too much detail, but a customer who deals with a lot of data back in March, where we all know it was a struggle to go anywhere at that point, because legally we weren't allowed to. And going into offices and see other people. They were hit by a cyber attack, and again, goes back full circle, bug in the system that allowed them to do that. And it was a bug that I didn't know about. A lot of my colleagues didn't know about. So that in itself is where we are left wide open. The bug in the system that's made by the people,
Yes, well,
to make
it's
it
essentially
perfect,
yes, as
leave
you
a
say,
bug and leave it open.
there's an over reliance on technology, isn't there? So
Yeah,
therefore, it's actually
100%.
quite easy to take a lot away from people very very quickly. Um,
Yeah.
you
We
know,
could bring a country, or a country could go to zero
yeah,
within a
yes,
click of a few
exactly, yeah,
buttons if
yeah,
they wanted to. There's no resilient, or not enough resilience, I believe, not enough resilience to stop that. And I think moving forward with technology as it is, there needs to be a lot of change to make it a safer place in the years to come. I mean, cryptocurrencies is one of those things that I think will fix that myself, hopefully, because I say it will fix it, but it gives us that, I don't know, chance to hold funds or hold a currency in a different way to a bank.
yes,
Because
yes,
now with banks, you used to go back again 40 or 50 years. You'd have your paying in book, you'd pay your cash in, and that would go in a big safe in the back, or go
yeah,
to a main plant. Whereas now money is just a number on a screen.
yeah, exactly.
You know, it's only my nan uses cash,
Hmm.
and I haven't used cash for years.
Yeah, I barely use it as well, to be honest. But I suppose the question from someone who's not into cryptocurrency really would be, what's the, what makes a cryptocurrency not also just a number on a screen? Because in effect it is, isn't it?
It is. It's a number on a screen. It's also not tangible, so you can't touch it. You
Yeah,
know, you can't go to the bank
yes.
withdraw your cash and say, "I've got
I understand that
this."
it's developed in such a way that it's not possible for you to steal it, because the way
Oh,
that it's done is it's linked directly to you, isn't it? So
yeah.
therefore you
So
can't,
it's,
the
yeah,
way
it's
that it
linked to
works is that
you.
using blockchain and
Um,
things like that, it stops it from being stolen, doesn't it? But
yeah, and
so there is that, but again, when you look at what we were saying a minute ago with regard to how how vulnerable technology can be, if there is a large scale cyber war, surely one of the first things that gets destroyed is it's cryptocurrency. Surely that's one of the first things that goes if there's a cyber war.
the good thing with crypto is it is pretty much unhackable compared to a bank. Um, you can have your cryptocurrency effectively. They call it cold storage,
Yes.
which basically means you take your coin or your token off of the blockchain. And that essentially means you can print it out as a bit of paper,
Hmm.
which means that if the
So
blockchain
if
was
the
attacked,
servers were ever taken down, for sake of
your
argument,
money's still safe.
you've got the backups essentially of it.
I suppose, yes, it does go back to having tangible cash,
Hmm. Yeah.
but you then know that without, yes, you may have your token details on the bit of paper, but without you as a person, your
Yeah.
money's safe. You're there's so many different ways to store your coins in
Yeah.
your wallet. You then have to have passwords that have to be entered in a 12 character password that has to be entered in a certain way.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that, you're never getting your coins back.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, but then again, it's probably something to do with the difference in our ages. Again, that I see the cryptocurrency as something that will almost definitely eventually happen in the world. It will be one of those things that becomes much more mainstream as we move forward. Yep. Unless there is a major issue with technology. But the moment there's a major issue with technology, cryptocurrency would effectively become virtually worthless, because you won't be able to actually trade in it.
yeah.
And you'll always end up back at some sort of physical currency. You'll always end up back there. It's kind of the only kind of constant that you can say, that when things really go bad, everybody reverts back to something physically tangible that they can hold in their hands, and so
to gold and silver.
Exactly, yeah, gold and everything else. And then obviously before they did gold, it was just resources you could trade with each other. So
Yeah.
so I think that I think that there's a very sort of large amount of skepticism from someone like myself who sees cryptocurrency as partly a fad, and in some senses almost like a bit of a scam too, because I've seen quite a lot of the ones that pop up and with this new cryptocurrency, and then within a few weeks or months that you never hear from them again, they just kind of disappear.
Yeah, you've got to be careful. Again, this goes back to the imperfect person. Someone like myself, because I do know the cryptocurrency world. I've been in the cryptocurrency world for 8 years, so I do get a general feel of good ones, bad ones, scams.
Yeah.
You know, you see all the social media, jump on this coin, jump on that one.
Yeah.
And because we aren't perfect, oh yeah, I'll jump on that. You know, if we're all perfect, we go, no, we know that's a scam, we're not going to touch it.
Yeah.
And I think some people then rely on the imperfect because they know they can take advantage of the imperfect.
Well, yes, but I suppose you could also make the argument that if everything was perfect, then no one ever tried to take advantage of anyone's either. So that wouldn't happen either. But that's such a hypothetical situation as to be not worth considering, really. So you're always gonna get people who are going to try to take advantage of others. Again, as you're always going to get people who make mistakes and do things wrong. That's just the world.
Yeah,
but,
it's hard, but
yeah, of course it is. I mean, I think the main thing I want to try to get to today is kind of the question mark about how you actually therefore cope with the fact that the world will never be perfect, and that there's never going to be that the fairy tale of happily ever after doesn't exist. That there's never going to be this, the utopia will never be born. It's an interesting thing, actually. So utopia, the word itself, comes from ancient Greek, and it actually means nowhere. So the word utopia actually means nowhere, which I think is quite I think it's quite prophetic. I think the whole idea of that is that it's supposed to say doesn't exist. Utopia is nowhere, and it never will be.
I think, I think a lot of people find it hard to realize that and understand that no matter what we do as a species, it's never going to be a perfect world, and there's always going to be issues.
Do you think that comes down to the education system? Because I personally do. I think that one of the biggest problems is especially nowadays. I mean, it was a little bit when I was at school. It was probably slightly more when you were, and it's even more now, that there's this constant insulation of people against anything that isn't great. Getting participation prizes for just for turning up at sports day, even if you're the slowest kid out there and you can't even finish, you can't even run down the track once. You're still getting a prize just like everyone else. It feels to me like education does not set anybody up for life.
Yeah, I agree. Going back to when my mum was at school, they were taught completely different to us now. And I don't think we're educated enough to realise that we're never going to be perfect people.
No. But I don't think it's that difficult, really, in education for people to teach children a sense of the reality of the world. I don't think that's actually that difficult a thing to do. You're not teaching something highly depressing. You're not telling them, life is going to be a long, tumultuous, episode of misery. What you're doing is just simply saying the realities are, a lot of the time, things aren't going to go right for you, and rather than sort of focusing, because I know when I was at school when it was sort of starting, because I sort of I was at most of my schooling was during the 90s. When it was kind of starting down that line a little bit, I know that whenever you did tests and whenever you did like little exams and things like that on the work up to the sort of larger main ones, the thing that always struck me about it was that there was never really much consequence for failing.
Yeah.
That was the problem. Like
Yeah.
if you failed the exam, then you got to take it again. You know, if you failed, if you didn't get the test right, then you got to take it again. You carried on in the class. You carried on doing all the same work as everyone else. You carried on with everything. Nothing really changed. There was actually no real impact on you for failing that particular test. And again, I'm not advocating that it goes completely the other way and you fail the test where, you know, teacher's going to take that out of front of the class and beat you with a stick. I don't think that's helpful either. But there needs to be some sort of balance there to say, look, if you fail at something, actually that's the more likely thing that's going to happen to you as you go through life. You are going to fail far more often than you succeed.
I think
so. They need to teach that. They need to build resilience in. I think
they do.
Yeah.
They do. I think I openly admit I'm an IT guy, as you know. Worked with you for 5 years, maybe. I can't remember.
4, I think.
Long
roughly,
time. Yeah, and I failed IT GCSE. Completely failed it. I got a U. At that point, I wasn't told that you failed. You know, you can't go and progress and do the IT courses you want to do this, do that. Perhaps at that point, if I was told that, I would have gone, whoa, this is what I want to do for the rest of my life. So perhaps I need to pick myself up and try again.
Yeah.
It was just like, oh, okay, well, you didn't pass IT, but you want to do an IT course, just make sure you get a couple of different grades and you'll be fine to go on to the next course. Where really in my head, perhaps thinking back to it now, I should have been given the, come on, you need to pass this if you want to go and do IT, because otherwise, how are you going to succeed any further?
Yeah, otherwise it's going to set you back a long way. Yeah, exactly.
Exactly. So I do think nowadays, like you say, just go and do the test again. It's fine.
Yeah, exactly.
It's the wrong way to. It's the wrong attitude to have.
Well, you don't really tend to get second chances when you get out in the real world. You know, if we look at it as like a as from a business perspective, obviously both of us run our own businesses. If we completely mess up something we do for a client, very rarely do we get any second chance of that.
Yeah, you've got one. You'll have one
it's
go.
Just like no, and a lot of the time they're going to ask for their money back as well.
Yeah.
So not only have you failed something, but you've wasted a lot of your time, a lot of your effort, and you've got to give the money back. You know, it's one of these things that is that it's the consequence that you suffer in real life that you don't get taught at school and taught in education.
I think that's a huge thing.
Yeah, and I think that traditionally that would have fallen back on parents to some degree. So parents would have been the people that then did that. But obviously part and parcel of what's going on at the moment is the fact that education is not setting children up for the realities of the world. And parents are predominantly, nowadays, both parents in a couple work. So both of them have less time with their children anyway. So they actually have less. So in essence, once their child reaches school age, the majority of them being raised is done at school.
Yeah, the most part. Yeah, there's a lot of hands-off parenting.
Yes,
and
it's not just hands off. I mean, I know of parents who basically they come home at the end of the day and the first thing they essentially do is put their children to bed.
Yeah,
that's it. You know, they've already been home, had dinner, everything else. They literally, the parents are coming home and it's bedtime for the children, and off they go to bed. They don't really see them until the weekends. You know, so I know that's not an uncommon situation for some people. So I think that when you are removing parents from parenting their children in that sense, and I don't believe there was any sort of intention to create that situation. It simply has been the way that things have gone as things have progressed. You've got to a point now where where the schools are taking more of a role in raising the children than the parents are. But the problem with that is obviously is that schools aren't particularly good at it. They also suffer no consequences for it being wrong. So if the school messes up a child and that child ends up going off the rails and having a terrible life, it's the parents of the family of that child that suffer. It's not the school.
Yeah, I agree.
It's not the teachers who run the school or anything like that. So there's always a problem with putting responsibility for something in the hands of people who suffer no consequences for the outcome.
Yeah, and I think that probably is full circle back to when a company releases a piece of software, they're not the ones using the piece of software. We, the consumer who have purchased that, or even, I've got an iPhone, you've got an iPhone, and we've gone out and bought these, whether on contract or we've paid for them. We then have to live our lives, and we do live our lives on our mobile phones. And if they don't work, we suffer, and we can't carry on in our normal life.
Although in a free market system, it's slightly different in as much as like if Apple continued to make bad products, if they started making shoddy phones and they just weren't working and people were getting fed up with them, people would start to go for a different kind of phone, and and sooner or later, eventually, they would go out of business. That's or they'd have to seriously pull their socks up and do something different. So it's slightly different in that sense, because obviously education is primarily state provided. And when something is state provided, you are in effect taking the economics and the free market out of it, which means that there is absolutely no consequence on a school that doesn't do very well.
No.
In reality.
No, because, I agree.
Yeah. Because they're not going to earn less money if all the children fail their exams.
Regardless, they're going to be paid.
Yeah, I mean, obviously, in fact, it almost works counterproductively. I know in these senses that when schools do worse, they get given bigger budgets
to improve. And I think
to try to improve things. But if they do progressively worse, they keep getting given more money to improve it. So it's almost a completely counter to the way that free markets work, and free markets have proven to make almost everything exponentially better because they are predicated on the voluntary exchange between people. The whole point of it is that I will send my child to your school because you do a good job, so I'm happy to pay you the money that it costs to educate my child at your school. Now there is some private schooling around, but obviously, because it's primarily state provided, you end up with a large amount of it that is fairly substandard because the people in it don't pay any consequences for it. If there was a way to provide something from the state but have some sort of accountability built in, so that if schools were continually failing, then teachers lost their jobs, then I'm pretty certain they would do a much better job of making sure that they didn't.
The consequences
that they did help prepare people, exactly. But again, that we're going down a slightly I say it's not an unsolvable path, but it is a path that has got so many complexities in it. I think we'll be lost well into the woods if we keep going down that
forever.
path, to be honest.
Forever.
Education is obviously a huge subject, but the problem, again, it's one of those things that a lot of political parties will come in on the basis of talking about what they're going to do with education, and in reality do very little with it, because as soon as they look at it, it's this huge leviathan of a thing that they've got no idea where to even start. So, but I think the basic point of it was that education doesn't prepare people for the imperfections of life. And it doesn't actually, I don't think, really teach children to be accepting and understanding and recognizing of their own imperfections. So for example, if there's something you're not very good at, or there's something that you do that you do wrong, or that it doesn't work very well for you, whatever it happens to be, the the schools don't teach you really to do much about that. They just kind of say, "Oh, pull your socks up," and that's kind of it. You're not really given any anything of any real tangible idea about what to do about that. And you're not really given any incentive to improve yourself.
Yeah, you're not given.
Yeah,
you're not given. You must do this to progress.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, it's not even so much that. It's that you're not really given the incentive to say, look, if you teach yourself things, that will actually go in better than anything we teach you. And I know that because I was someone that paid very little attention at school because I just wasn't really very interested in it, and most of the stuff that went on there I just had very little time for.
Yeah.
And I know that since leaving school I've learned so much more than I was ever taught at school because I taught it to myself. But there's lots of things that would have been helpful to be taught at school that that there's never even an attempt to teach you. So I've always thought that it can't be that difficult for school in maths, for example, to just do away with Pythagoras theorem, because who the hell needs that, and instead teach children what a mortgage is. Teach people about debt. Teach people about bank accounts. Teach children about interest and how compound interest works and how and how money works. Because you're never really taught. I was never taught anything like that at school.
I mean, I remember when I left college, got a job, and I wanted to buy a car. I was, happy. I just got my first proper job, my first wage, and oh yeah, perfect. I've got loads of money now, when I really didn't. But I remember saying to my dad, I want to buy a new car, and I didn't have the money, and I said, I'm going to get a loan. And at that point, I was 19, I think, 19, maybe 20. And I said, oh, that's all right. I'll borrow 10,000. That's fine.
No consequences, no idea of the ramifications of what that actually meant. Yeah.
And then think that I can get that 10,000 in perfect by
brilliant,
car.
10 grand, way.
Then down the line, you're like, oh dear.
Yeah. Now what do I do?
Now what do I do? Yeah. Because it's now
I owe someone £10,000. Yeah.
And it's.
Well, actually, no, you probably owe someone £12,000. Probably.
At that point, yeah.
Exactly.
So it was then my dad that sat down and said, right, well, if you're going to borrow that money, you're going to expect to pay back this much over this time. And I'm like, wow.
Yeah.
I thought it was a really nice idea to borrow that money to buy a car, but it doesn't now. No. But again, rather than teaching you pie at school, teach you, well, if you were to get this loan, you'd have to pay this back.
And how much would you need to be earning to cover that and still have money left for yourself and the other things you've got to do? Teach people how to budget. Teach people how to actually manage their lives to some degree. Because I was never taught how to budget. I'm still shit at budgeting now, and I'm well into my mid-30s. It's I'm terrible at it because I was just never taught it. And there was no attempt to teach it to me, ever.
If you're taught these things at a young age, where your mind is a sponge or your brain's a sponge, and that is taught to you over and over, you're going to learn these things and go, okay, perhaps I better not go and have a kebab tonight because I've got to pay the electric bill next week. Exactly. And that is a budget. Yeah. So you'd know these things rather than millions of people, especially at the moment, have got no money because
exactly. I think they did a study recently I think it was in the US. I think they said, and they said it was I can't remember the exact figures. So these are probably going to be fairly off, but I know it was a fairly substantial amount. It was something like 60% of the families that they surveyed in America could not have dealt with a unexpected bill of more than $500.
Yeah.
So if they suddenly had an unexpected expense of $500 or more, they couldn't cover it.
I've had similar.
Yeah.
My car broke down a few months ago, and I went for an MOT, and it came back, and there was a cracked spring and a few other bits, and I was like, I haven't budgeted for this. I'd budgeted because in my head, the
I was just going to
MOT's
pay for the
45
MOT. It was
quid.
going to pass, and that was it. Yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
later on. So then again, back to my dad. Didn't budget for it.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, need some money for that. Exactly.
And
But
it's yes, that is. I didn't borrow the money from a bank, so I didn't put myself in debt, but I put myself in debt to my family.
yeah,
And
exactly. Yeah. But
if
this,
I'd gone back and known that, okay, well, the car's going for its MOT, what if? And I think that is one of the huge
well, I would say
points.
it's even earlier than that because if you're taught to budget from an early age and you start doing it from the moment you start earning money, by the time you're getting into your late 20s, 30s, things like that, you should have a fair amount of money that you've managed to save up. So therefore, unexpected expenses that come up, you can do something about them. You know, you've got reserves there to deal with. But again, very few people are being taught that these days. Very few people are able to do that, and most people are fairly leveraged on debt rather than actually having any savings themselves. So they're essentially in kind of in negative equity in real terms. You know, they're when if you had to value what they were financially worth, they're in basically minus figures, which
I think that it's very easy for someone to say with an unexpected, oh, I haven't got that money, that's fine, I can borrow it.
Yeah, exactly.
And there's no then ramification.
Debt isn't necessarily a bad thing in and of itself, because debt is essentially what has allowed the modern world to come into existence. Because the banking system and the debt and the creation of debts and so on actually allowed the growth of businesses that created that created the mills, the printing presses, the light bulbs, all these inventions and innovations that have come out came from companies predominantly that had indebted themselves in order to get where they got to. They had to borrow money to get there, and the banking system doing that has helped create the world that we're in. So you can't necessarily say that debt is a bad thing overall, because obviously it's not, but unsustainable debt obviously is. But again, we'll go down a very, very complex path if we start talking about the way that economic debt and things work. But from my perspective, I've had debts in my life. I've still got a couple now, and it's easy. They are easy enough to deal with and get and put aside and just pay off on a monthly thing and so on. It's just something that hangs over you for a while. And it's not actually a very nice feeling. Nobody wants that to be hanging over them the whole time. So it's in an ideal situation, you'd rather not be in debt at all. But if nobody was, then the world financial system would collapse. so it's kind of it's a very interesting balance that exists there.
Do you think that we are sort of steering towards then going with the imperfect, that being in debt is part of imperfection, or do we think that being in debt is part of everyday life and that is how it's always going to be?
Well, debt has not always been the case. I mean, debt's only really started to accrue into the lives of the average person in the last 150 years or so, slightly less, really. I mean, before that, most people didn't earn enough money to be able to accrue debts. There was obviously some people who took out loans and borrowed money and were in debt, but it wasn't something that was common amongst every single person. It was a fairly uncommon thing, but again, obviously, our entire system over the last 200 years or so that has created the world we live in now has been predicated on it. So it's obviously got some very, very big advantages to it. And realistically, debt is only a problem if you borrow more than you can afford to pay back, or if at a point after borrowing it, you lose your ability to pay it back. That's when debts become problematic. But again, as with economics is often misconstrued, because people look at economics as like a system or like a science or something like that, whereas economics is people.
Mm.
People are the entire foundation of economics. It's the behavior of people, what they do with their money, which governs the entirety of economics. And so, as a result, economics will never be an exact science, because people are not an exact science, because people are imperfect, and therefore people will make strange decisions at strange times that don't actually benefit them or anyone else in any way, shape, or form. But they still made that decision because there cannot be any perfection in the world, because we live in an imperfect world, and the bug in the system is us. I hope you all enjoyed this video. It was really enjoyable. Went in directions I never thought it might, and really ended up in some very interesting discussions and conversations. So I hope you liked it. Please do leave your comments, like us, follow us. Please subscribe. Follow our social media as well, our Instagram especially. We need the followers at the moment, so please do go ahead and follow us. And we look forward to seeing you all again next time. Goodbye.